This is anonymous, not a person, an idea. A reminder that regular people can still look straight at power, call it what it is, and refuse to stay quiet. And today, Donald Trump is losing it, because an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting is happening, while he is doing what he always does when reality shows up. He panic posts, he distracts, and he lies. So picture this. The Security Council is in session, the world is watching, and Trump is pumping out post after post like his thumbs are trying to outrun accountability. And what is he posting about? Not the UN Charter, not sovereignty, not the consequences of using force. He is obsessing over the 2020 election again, still spreading the lie that it was stolen. He is literally circling back to voter fraud from 2020 like he is doing a greatest hits tour right on cue. That is the mindset. We are dealing with a man who forgets nothing except facts. Inside that chamber, the United States is represented by Trump's ambassador to the UN, Michael Waltz, and what comes out of his mouth is raw, imperial, and honestly chilling.
As Secretary Rubio stated just yesterday, this is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be used as a base of operation for our nation's adversaries and competitors and rivals of the United States. You can't turn Venezuela into the operating hub for Iran, for Hezbollah, for gangs, for Cuban intelligence agents, and other malign actors that control that country. You cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States, under the control of illegitimate leaders, and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, and stolen by a handful of oligarchs inside of Venezuela.
Then Waltz tries to launder a war into a cute little phrase. He insists there was no war against Venezuela, that it was just a law enforcement operation.
Colleagues, the United States successfully carried out a surgical law enforcement operation facilitated by the U.S. military against two indicted fugitives of American justice, narco-terrorist Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores. Colleagues, Nicolas Maduro is responsible for attacks on the people of the United States, for destabilizing the Western Hemisphere, and illegitimately repressing the people of Venezuela. As Secretary Rubio has said, there is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades. The United States arrested a narco trafficker who is now going to stand trial in the United States in accordance with the rule of law for the crimes he's committed against our people for 15 years. A similar action was taken in 1989 against Manuel Noriega.
And here is the part they want you to ignore. The consequence, the backlash, the damage. The moment the United States does this, it loses moral high ground. It loses the ability to lecture anyone. It hands Russia and China a gift-wrapped talking point on a global stage. And boy, do they use it. China's deputy ambassador gets up and says China is deeply shocked and strongly condemns the unilateral action by the United States.
On January the 3rd, the United States blatantly launched large-scale military strikes against Venezuela, forcibly seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and took them out of the country. It claimed that it will run Venezuela and even didn't rule out launching a second round of military operations on an even larger scale. China is deeply shocked by and strongly condemns the unilateral, illegal, and bullying acts of the U.S. For some time now, the international community has repeatedly expressed grave concern over the U.S. sanctions, blockade, and threats of force against Venezuela. The Council convened 2 emergency meetings, during which Secretary General Guterres, many Council members, and countries in the region and beyond unanimously called for abiding by the UN Charter and the international law, maintaining calm and restraint, resolving disputes peacefully, de-escalating tensions, and safeguarding regional stability. However, as a permanent member of the Council, The U.S. has disregarded the grave concerns of the international community, wantonly trampled upon Venezuela's sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests, and seriously violated the principles of sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, peaceful settlement of international disputes, and the prohibition of the use of force in international relations. These principles constitute the fundamental tenets of the UN Charter and form the cornerstone of maintaining international peace and security.
Normally, in a situation like this, you would see allies of the United States speaking up to soften the blow. Not here. Watching this as an American is tragic. The United States is sitting there basically alone, looking like the bad guy, the evil force in the room, because Trump's crew is acting like international law is optional. Then Denmark speaks, and this hits extra hard, because Trump has been threatening Greenland next. Trump keeps tossing out places like Cuba, Greenland, Colombia, potentially Canada, always playing with that gross 51st state rhetoric. Lately, he has been saying in a few months we are going to take Greenland. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Then Russia piles on, and yes, it is grotesque because Russia violates sovereignty too, but that is exactly the point. When the US breaks the rules, Russia gets to lecture. Russia's ambassador basically says, okay, this is your so-called rules-based order you used to lecture us on. This is what you preached at us. Great work. Maybe we should do it differently. He talks about the consequences of US recklessness and selectivity in respecting international law. He says they are appalled by Washington's unparalleled cynicism, that Washington did not even attempt to conceal the true aim, unbridled control over Venezuela's natural resources and hegemonic ambitions in Latin America. He condemns the armed aggression and says there is no justification for crimes cynically perpetrated by the United States. He points to reports about the abducted president of Venezuela and his spouse being in the United States in New York, and calls on the U.S. leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of an independent state and his spouse. He says any conflict needs to be resolved through dialogue, as enshrined in the UN Charter, and he throws in that jab about how some states have begun applying those principles selectively. And then the UN itself speaks. Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo reads a statement from Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He says he remains deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected with regard to the military action. He reminds the room the Charter enshrines the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The maintenance of international peace and security depends on the continued commitment of all member states to adhere to all provisions of the Charter. He says Venezuela has experienced decades of internal instability and social and economic turmoil. Democracy has been undermined. Millions have fled the country. The situation is critical, but it is still possible to prevent a wider and more destructive conflagration. He calls on all Venezuelan actors to engage in inclusive democratic dialogue, in which all sectors of society can determine their future. He stresses full respect for human rights, the rule of law, and the sovereign will of the Venezuelan people. He urges Venezuela's neighbors and the international community to act in solidarity and in adherence to the principles and rules erected to promote peaceful coexistence. And he makes the point that destroys Waltz's whole excuse. International law contains tools to address issues such as illicit traffic and narcotics disputes about resources and human rights concerns. That is the route we need to take. Not bombs, not abductions, not imperial fantasies dressed up as law enforcement. But while the world is talking sovereignty law and restraint, Trump is online doing what he does best, poisoning the public mind. He keeps posting about the 2020 election. He boosts garbage like an IT expert claiming to have access to a forensic image from Dominion showing the election was stolen, and he adds that it was most recently stolen in Brazil too. He claims Trump votes were switched to Joe Biden votes. This is what he is posting about, while the UN is condemning his administration's actions. Then he is ranting about windmills, claiming they kill bald eagles, while he posts photos of places and years that do not match what he is saying, like Israel and Spain and Taiwan pictures from way back. It is chaos, it is sloppy, and it is deliberate, because if everything is noise, nothing is accountability. And then the propaganda pipeline kicks in because Trump never lies alone. His MAGA mouthpieces go on TV and spew the cover story on what is basically state regime media. Congressman Scott Fitzgerald says this was not an invasion. It was a law enforcement operation like what Teddy Roosevelt did. Dressing it up with Monroe Doctrine talk like imperial nostalgia is a legal argument. Maria Bartiromo nods along and claims Democrats get upset over everything Trump does, while he is focused on enormous things, like drugs coming into the country and border security. She says they were killing us with those drugs and we have to stop those drugs, even as the narrative is being used as a shield for an international scandal. Then you have Tom Emmer calling it a great day, claiming this was the extradition of an illegitimate leader, someone who stole an election, praising Trump as the president of peace, saying what Trump is doing is stabilizing the region, that Americans are safer today, that the Western Hemisphere is safer today, because of the action the Trump administration took. And then Senator Rick Scott says he is glad Trump did not just take Maduro and walk away. He says Trump is committed to freedom and democracy in Venezuela, that he talked to Marco Rubio and the president, and they are committed to liberty. Then he admits the quiet part out loud. He cannot tell you how they are going to get there, but he believes they will get there. That is not a plan, that is a slogan. Meanwhile, the actual story underneath is ugly and transactional. Trump is talking like he is running Venezuela and openly framing it around oil. He is floating a puppet from within the regime to get the oil, while rejecting the opposition leadership, including Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez. In other words, the freedom and democracy talk is just wrapping paper. The real goal is control and extraction, and the international backlash keeps spreading. You have governments in Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Spain, Mexico, and Uruguay uniting in a joint statement condemning the aggression and warning against any attempt by Trump to run the country and violate its resources and sovereignty. You hear from Japan's Prime Minister warning that challenges to the international order are gaining momentum in the Indo-Pacific, that we are seeing further military buildups by China and North Korea, and the strengthening of cooperation between China and Russia and North Korea. This is what happens when a reckless leader throws out rules and calls it strength. On Greenland, Keir Starmer is asked point-blank if he would condemn Trump going into Greenland. He says clearly the future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark is a close European ally, a close NATO ally, and the future has to be for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. He says he stands with Denmark. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states is non-negotiable, from Ukraine to Gaza passing through Venezuela, and Spain will be committed to the United Nations, and in full solidarity with Denmark and the people of Greenland. So yeah, Trump loses it as an emergency. UN meeting condemns him is not just a headline. It is the world watching the United States stand nearly alone, in the very room built to prevent this kind of behavior, and watching Trump respond by ranting about a 5-year-old election and pushing propaganda like it is oxygen. We will keep you posted every step of the way. Hit subscribe, share this, talk about it, push back on the lies, demand that leaders respect international law and human dignity, because if you let Trump normalize conquest dressed up as law enforcement, you are not watching history. You are letting it happen.